She abandoned me when I was a penniless cripple. But 7 years later, she's back at my mansion with a son who has my eyes and a secret that's worth killing for. The sound of the doorbell wasn't just a noise, it was a rhythmic intrusion into the silence of my Sunday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. My house, a glass and steel sanctuary perched on the edge of the city's most expensive hillside, was designed for solitude. It was the physical manifestation of everything I had built from the ruins of my former life. I set my glass of scotch on the mahogany desk, the ice clinking against the crystal, and pulled up the security feed on my phone. The image on the screen made my heart stop, then hammer against my ribs with a violence I hadn't felt in years. Standing there, drenched in the sudden downpour of a late October storm, was Sarah. She looked different, yet painfully the same. The golden hair that used to catch the light was matted and dark with rain. The expensive coats she used to covet were replaced by a thin, shivering frame wrapped in a threadbare cardigan. But it was the eyes, those wide hazel eyes that I once saw my entire future in, that hit me the hardest. They weren't glowing with the ambition I remembered. They were hollowed out by a desperation so thick I could almost feel it through the screen. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind, usually a sharp instrument of logic and business strategy, was flooded with images I had spent 7 years trying to drown. I remembered the smell of antiseptic. That was the scent of my darkest hour. 7 years ago, I wasn't the man in the hillside mansion. I was a man in a hospital bed, my legs shattered in a collision that had claimed the lives of both my parents. I was 24 years old, staring at a mountain of medical debt, funeral costs, and a prognosis that said I might never walk without a cane again. I remembered Sarah sitting in the plastic chair by my bed. At first, she had been my rock. She held my hand while I wept for my mother and father. She promised we'd get through it. We were engaged, after all. In sickness and in health, she'd whispered, her breath warm against my ear. But as the weeks turned into months, the warmth evaporated. The medical bills started arriving, and my insurance company started looking for loopholes. The high-paying architectural firm I had just joined restructured me out of a job because they couldn't wait for my recovery. I was a liability. I was broken. And slowly, I watched Sarah realize that her life with me wasn't going to be the fairy tale of Galus and travel she'd signed up for. It was going to be bedpans, physical therapy, and poverty. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday. I'll never forget it. I had finally been discharged, relegated to a cramped third-floor walk-up because we couldn't afford our old place. I was struggling to navigate the narrow hallway on crutches, the pain in my hips screaming with every movement. I had asked her to help me get to the bathroom. She didn't move from the sofa. She just stared at her phone, her face a mask of cold detachment. "I can't do this anymore, Elias," she said. Her voice wasn't sad. It was tired, like I was a chore she was finally finished with. "Can't do what? Help me to the door?" I asked, breathless from the exertion. "Any of it," she snapped, finally looking at me. "This isn't the life I wanted. I'm 23. I should be out living, not playing nurse to a man who can't even walk across a room. You're a shell of the person I loved. You have no money, no parents, and no future. I'm choosing myself." She had packed her bags while I was at my physical therapy session the next day. She didn't leave a note. She didn't leave a forwarding address. She just took the engagement ring, the one I'd spent my entire savings on, and vanished. She left me in a room I couldn't navigate, with a bank account in the negatives and a heart that felt more shattered than my bones. I should have died in that apartment. There were days I wanted to. But something else took over, a cold, crystalline spite. I realized that if I let myself fail, she would be right. She would have been justified in leaving a loser. So I used that spite as fuel. I did the exercises until I screamed. I started a freelance coding business from my bed, working 20 hours a day until my eyes bled. I built and I built and I built until the name Elias Thorne meant something in the tech world. Now, 7 years later, the woman who had walked out on a broken man was standing at the door of a king. I stood up, my legs moving perfectly, the only reminder of the accident being a slight stiffness when the weather turned cold. I walked to the heavy oak door, my reflection in the hallway mirror showing a man who looked nothing like the victim she had abandoned. I looked powerful. I looked settled. I pulled the door open. The wind whipped a spray of rain into the entryway. Sarah flinched, looking up at me. Her bottom lip trembled, and for a second I saw a flash of the girl I had loved, but it was eclipsed by the sheer, raw terror in her expression. "Elias," she rasped. Her voice was thin, dehydrated. "Sarah," I said, my voice as flat as a grave marker, "you're on private property, and you're about 7 years too late for a conversation." I started to close the door, but she lunged forward, her hands, red and raw from the cold, grabbing the edge of the heavy wood. "Please," she sobbed, the sound tearing from her throat. "Please, Elias, I know I don't deserve a second of your time. I know what I did. I've lived with it every day, but I have nowhere else to go. They're going to take him, Elias. If I don't get the money by tomorrow, they're going to take him." I paused, my hand tightening on the handle. "Take who, Sarah? What are you talking about?" She reached into the pocket of her damp cardigan and pulled out a crumpled, tear-stained photograph. She held it out with shaking fingers. It was a picture of a little boy, maybe 5 years old. He had my nose, my messy dark hair, and the same stubborn set to his jaw that I saw in the mirror every morning. "This is Leo," she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "He's 5, Elias. He's your son, and he's the reason I'm here. He's dying, and you're the only one who can save him." The photograph felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. The boy in the picture didn't just look like me. He looked like the ghost of my own childhood. He had the same slightly crooked smile, the same deep-set, inquisitive eyes that my father used to say could see right through a person's secrets. I looked from the photo to Sarah. The rain was dripping off her chin, her clothes clinging to her skeletal frame. For a split second, the cold, armored shell I'd built around my heart cracked. But then I remembered the smell of that third-floor walk-up. I remembered the sound of her suitcase zipping shut while I lay helpless on the floor, unable to even stand up to stop her. "A son," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You waited 5 years to tell me I have a son? I was scared, Elias," she cried, her voice cracking. "When I left, I didn't know yet, and by the time I found out, you were losing everything. You were bitter and broken, and I didn't think you could handle a child. I thought I was doing us both a favor by disappearing." "Doing us a favor?" I stepped closer, the warmth of the house spilling out into the storm, mocking her. "You mean doing yourself a favor. You didn't want a crippled husband, and you certainly didn't want a fatherless child with no bank account. You chose the easy way out, Sarah. You always did." "It hasn't been easy," she screamed, her desperation finally boiling over. "I've worked 3 jobs. I've lived in places you wouldn't put your dog in. I did it all for him. But Leo, he has a heart defect, Elias. It's congenital. It's getting worse. He needs a valve replacement that costs more than I'll earn in 3 lifetimes. The hospital, they won't put him on the priority list without a massive down payment because I have no insurance and a credit score in the dirt. You're his father. You have millions. Please, if you ever loved me—" "Stop," I hissed. "Do not talk about love. You forfeited the right to use that word the moment you walked out that door 7 years ago." I looked back at the photo. The boy, Leo, was smiling at the camera, holding a plastic dinosaur. He was innocent. He didn't know his mother was a coward or that his father was a man who had traded his soul for a skyscraper and a stock portfolio. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "For all I know, this is a long con. You see my name in the headlines, you see the Thorn Tower on the skyline, and you decide it's time for a payday. How do I know he's mine?" Sarah reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out a folded piece of paper, shielded from the rain by a plastic sleeve. The DNA results. I did a discreet test using a hair sample from an old coat you left behind before the move, and these are his medical records from the state clinic. I took the papers. My eyes scanned the technical jargon: tetralogy of Fallot, pulmonary valve stenosis, worsening cyanosis. The dates lined up. The DNA probability was 99.9%. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the porch roof. I should have felt something. Joy, perhaps, or a sense of duty. Instead, all I felt was a cold, calculating rage. She had stolen 5 years of his life from me. She had let him suffer in poverty while I spent my millions trying to fill the void she left behind. "I'll pay for the surgery," I said. Sarah let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch as if it were poison. "On one condition," I added. She looked up, her face a mask of hope and fear. "Anything. I'll do anything." "I want full custody," I said, the words coming out sharp and final. "You sign over your parental rights. You walk away just like you did 7 years ago. Only this time it's permanent. You get the money for his life, but you lose the right to be in it. I will provide him with the best doctors, the best schools, and a future you can't even imagine, but he will never know you exist." Sarah's face went deathly pale. "Elias, you can't be serious. He's my whole world. He's the only thing I have." "And I was your whole world once, wasn't I?" I countered. "Until the world got a little too dark. Now you're asking me to save him. This is the price. Take it or leave it." She stared at me, her eyes searching mine for a flicker of the man she used to know. She found nothing. I was a mirror, reflecting only her own ruthlessness back at her. She opened her mouth to speak, to plead, to bargain, but a sudden sound cut her off. It was the screech of tires on the wet asphalt at the bottom of my long driveway. A set of headlights swung around the bend, cutting through the darkness and the rain. 2 black SUVs were racing up the hill, moving with a speed that suggested they weren't lost tourists. Sarah turned, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. She didn't look surprised, she looked hunted. "Oh, God," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They found me. Elias, you have to let me in, now." "Who found you, Sarah?" I demanded, my hand moving toward the security alarm button just inside the door. "Who is in those cars?" She didn't answer. She lunged past me into the foyer, her wet shoes skidding on the marble. I grabbed her by the shoulder to shove her back out, but she gripped my lapels, her face inches from mine. "The money I used for his initial treatments—" "I didn't earn all of it, Elias," she hissed, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "I borrowed it from the wrong people who don't care about sick children. They think I have the rest of what I owe them. They think I came here to get it from you." The SUVs slid to a halt in front of my house, their doors flying open before the engines had even cut out. 4 men stepped out, dressed in dark tactical gear, the light from my porch glinting off the cold steel of the suppressed weapons in their hands. These weren't debt collectors. These were professional hitters. "Elias," Sarah whimpered, shrinking behind me. "They aren't just here for the money anymore. They know who you are. They know what you're worth." One of the men stepped forward, raising a device in his hand. A second later, every light in my house flickered and died. The security system gave a pathetic dying chirp as the backup generators failed to kick in. We were plunged into total darkness, the only sound the heavy thud of boots hitting the porch. I felt Sarah's hand tighten on my arm, but as I reached for my phone to call my private security, a cold metallic voice boomed from the darkness outside. "Mr. Thorne, we don't want you. We just want the woman and the boy. Give them to us and you keep your life. You have 10 seconds to decide if a son you've never met is worth the empire you've built." I looked at Sarah in the gloom. The boy, I whispered, my heart freezing. Where is Leo, Sarah? Where is he right now? She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. He's in the trunk of the first car, Elias. They already have him. The world turned into a nightmare of shadows and rain. My heart, which I had spent years training to be a cold, calculating machine, was suddenly a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs. My son, a boy I hadn't known existed 5 minutes ago, was currently locked in the trunk of a car being guarded by professional killers. Inside! Now! I grabbed Sarah's arm and yanked her away from the door, slamming the heavy oak shut and throwing the manual deadbolts. The electronic locks were useless now that the power had been cut, a detail that chilled me to the bone. They hadn't just cut the lines. They had used a localized EMP or a sophisticated bypass. These weren't thugs. These were specialists. Elias, we have to do something. They'll kill him. Sarah was hysterical, her voice rising to a shriek that echoed off the cold marble walls of the foyer. Shut up! I snapped, my voice a low, vibrating growl. If you want him to live, you need to be quiet. Every sound we make is a target for them. I dragged her toward the back of the house, my mind racing through the blueprints of my own sanctuary. I had designed this place to be a fortress, but I had relied too much on the smart aspect of it. Now, my high-tech sensors and automated defenses were nothing more than expensive junk. The trunk, Sarah, I whispered, as we crouched behind a kitchen island, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Why would they put him in the trunk? If they wanted leverage, they'd show him to me. Because they're not just holding him, Elias, she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. They have him on a portable ventilator. He was supposed to have his procedure 2 days ago. He's stable, but he can't breathe on his own for long if the battery dies. They're using his life as a countdown. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just threatening to shoot him. They were letting a clock run out on his very breath. Who are they, Sarah? Truly. No more lies about debt collectors. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting a strobe light flash of lightning. I was working as a courier for a pharmaceutical startup, Vaxin. I found out they were falsifying clinical trial data for a heart medication, the same kind of medication Leo needed. I stole the encrypted drive with the original data. I thought I could blackmail them for the surgery money. I thought I was being smart, playing the game like you do. You didn't play a game, Sarah. You walked into a slaughterhouse with a plastic knife, I spat. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. It didn't come from the front door. It came from the second floor. They were coming through the balconies. They were splitting up, flanking us. Follow me. Don't make a sound. I led her through the dark, navigating by memory. We reached my study, a room lined with thousands of physical books, a low-tech vanity that was about to save our lives. I pulled a specific volume on the third shelf, and a section of the wall groaned open. It wasn't a panic room. It was a secure server closet with its own independent shielded power supply. As we stepped inside and the door hissed shut, the room bathed us in a dim, red emergency light. I immediately went to a small console and began punching in codes. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I'm waking up the only part of this house that doesn't run on the main grid," I said. "My private network. If I can get a signal out, my security team will be here in 10 minutes, but I need to see what's happening outside." I flicked a switch, and a single monitor flickered to life. It was a thermal feed from the perimeter cameras, which were hardwired and shielded. The screen showed the 2 SUVs. There were 6 men in total. 4 were already inside the house, bright orange heat signatures moving through my living room. 2 remained by the cars. One of them was leaning against the trunk of the lead SUV, smoking a cigarette. "There," I pointed. "The trunk. The heat signature is faint, but it's there. That's him." Seeing that small, flickering pulse of orange on the screen changed something inside me. The resentment I felt for Sarah, The years of bitterness. It didn't vanish, but it was pushed aside by a primal, ancient instinct. That was my blood in that car. That was my legacy, dying in the dark because of the woman who had already destroyed me once. "Elias, look," Sarah whispered, pointing to the screen. The man smoking the cigarette tossed it away and checked his watch. He tapped on the trunk lid twice, then turned to his partner. He made a cutting motion across his throat. "No," Sarah gasped. "The 10 seconds. The time is up." On the monitor, the man by the car reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a remote detonator. He wasn't going to wait for me to surrender. He was going to eliminate the leverage to show me he was serious about the mother and the drive. "They're going to blow the car," I whispered, my horror cold and absolute. But then, something happened that didn't make sense. The thermal signature in the trunk didn't just sit there. It moved. Not like a child struggling, but with a sudden, violent burst of energy. The trunk didn't explode. Instead, the entire SUV rocked on its suspension. The man with the detonator frowned, stepping closer to the vehicle. He reached for the handle to see what was causing the commotion. As he popped the latch, the trunk didn't swing open. It flew open with such force it hit him in the face, sending him sprawling back into the mud. A figure climbed out of the trunk. It wasn't a 5-year-old boy. Through the grainy red thermal lens, I saw a person. Small, yes, but far too agile and coordinated to be a dying child. The figure moved with a terrifying, predatory speed, wearing what looked like a tactical HUD over their face. In one hand, they held a combat knife, in the other, a suppressed pistol. Before the second guard could even raise his rifle, the figure from the trunk had closed the gap, driving the knife into the guard's throat while simultaneously firing 2 rounds into the chest of the man on the ground. Sarah was staring at the screen, her mouth hanging open. "What? Who is that? That's not Leo. Where is my son?" I looked at Sarah, and for the first time I saw not just desperation, but a flicker of something else, a crack in her story. "You said he was in the trunk, Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You said he was dying." The figure on the screen turned toward the house, looking directly into the hidden camera lens. They raised a hand and wiped the blood off their visor. Even through the thermal, I recognized the silhouette. It was a woman, short hair, athletic build. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small device, holding it up to the camera. It was a digital timer glowing bright green. It was counting down 0059, 0058. "Elias," Sarah whispered, backing away from me toward the server door. "I had to get you into the secure room. It was the only way to bypass the biometric locks on your primary vault." The secure door behind us, the one I had just locked, hissed open. Standing there wasn't a hitman. It was a man in a bespoke suit, holding a silenced handgun leveled directly at my heart. He looked like a banker, except for the cold, dead vacuum in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah," the man said. "You played the grieving mother beautifully. I almost believed you myself." I looked at Sarah, the betrayal cutting deeper than the accident, deeper than the years of silence. "There is no son, is there?" Sarah didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, her voice a hollow shell. "There is a Leo, Elias, but he's not yours, and he's not dying. He's with my sister in Chicago, safe and sound as long as I finish this job." The man in the suit smiled. "Mr. Thorne, you have something much more valuable than a son. You have the master encryption keys to the global banking backbone, keys you've spent 7 years hiding in this very room." He stepped forward, the barrel of the gun inches from my forehead. "Now," he said, "open the vault or I'll let Sarah tell you exactly how much fun it was to watch you cry in that hospital bed 7 years ago while she planned her exit strategy with us." I looked from the gun to Sarah, then back to the monitor, where the timer was now at 0:10. "The woman in the trunk," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "She's not one of yours, is she?" The man in the suit hesitated, his brow furrowing. What woman? The timer on the screen hit 0000. The entire mansion didn't explode. Instead, every single light in the house and the city grid visible through the window didn't just come back on. They surged. A blinding, white-hot flash of power overloaded every circuit in the room. In the chaos of the electrical surge, a voice boomed over the study's intercom, one I hadn't heard in years, but one I recognized instantly. System override initiated. Welcome back, Project Chimera. Elias, get down. The world didn't just brighten, it dissolved into a searing, optic white void. The electrical surge was so violent that the high-end LED panels in my ceiling didn't just light up. They detonated, showering the room in a rain of glass and sparks. I didn't wait to see if the man in the suit was blinded. I dove. My shoulder slammed into the mahogany desk, and I rolled behind it just as a silenced round thudded into the wood where my chest had been a second before. The sound was a soft, lethal phut, followed by the man's grunt of pain as he shielded his eyes. "Aria! Full lockdown! Protocol 0! I yelled. "Protocol 0 engaged, Elias," the voice responded. It was calm, melodic, and possessed the exact cadence of my mother's voice. I had spent 3 years and $40 million coding that voice, mapping it from old home movies and voice memos. It was the only way I could stand to live in this house alone. Secondary power rerouted to defensive baffles. Visuals restored in 3, 2, 1. The red emergency lighting flickered back on, but it was different now, pulsing with a rhythmic, predatory intensity. From the doorway of the server room, the man in the suit, who I now recognized as Miller, a disgraced former intelligence officer turned corporate fixer, was blinking rapidly, his gun swinging wildly. "Sarah, where is he?" Miller roared, his voice thick with panic. Sarah was huddled in the corner, her hands over her ears. She looked up, her face a mask of pure terror. "I don't know. He's gone." "I'm right here, Miller," I said, my voice echoing through the room's speakers, making it impossible to pinpoint my location. "And you're currently standing on a pressurized floor plate that is rigged to 4 gallons of liquid nitrogen. One more step, and you'll be a very expensive ice sculpture." It was a lie. There was no liquid nitrogen, but Miller didn't know that. He froze, his boots hovering inches off the marble. "The keys, Thorne," Miller hissed, trying to regain his composure. "You give them to me, or I call the team outside. They'll burn this hillside to the ground with you inside it." "The team outside is a bit preoccupied," I said, glancing at the monitor. The woman from the trunk, the one Sarah claimed was a dying 5-year-old, was moving through the house like a ghost made of obsidian. She hadn't used the stairs. She was scaling the interior atrium, her movements fluid and terrifyingly efficient. She reached the balcony overlooking the study, and before Miller could even look up, she vaulted over the railing. She landed behind him with 0 sound. A flash of silver, a muffled choke, and Miller's gun clattered to the floor. She had him in a surgical sleeper hold, her forearm compressed against his carotid artery with the precision of a vice. 5 seconds later, his eyes rolled back and he slumped into a heap. She didn't kill him. She just discarded him like a piece of used equipment. The woman stood up, pulling off her tactical HUD. She wasn't an assassin, or at least not just one. She was young, maybe 30, with a jagged scar running from her temple to her jawline. Her eyes were a piercing, icy blue, eyes I had seen before, in a different life. "Elias," she said, her voice like gravel. "It's been a long time." "Sloan?" I whispered, standing up from behind the desk. Sloan had been my father's head of security. She was supposed to have been in the car with my parents 7 years ago. I was told she had died in the same twisted metal that claimed them. "How are you alive?" I asked, my mind reeling. The police, the hospital, they said there were no survivors in the front seat. "The police were paid to say a lot of things, Elias," Sloan said, her eyes shifting to Sarah, who was trying to crawl toward the exit, including the lie that your parents' death was an accident. I felt the room tilt. What? Stay where you are, Sarah, Sloane commanded, pointing a finger that was as steady as a mountain. If you move another inch, I'll stop being polite. Sarah stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sudden, desperate honesty that was more terrifying than any of her lies. Elias, I didn't want them to kill them. I was just supposed to watch you. They told me it would just be a warning. They weren't supposed to cut the brakes. The words hit me like a physical blow. The accident, the hospital, the months of agony. It wasn't just that Sarah had abandoned me in my darkest hour. She had helped create it. You were there, I whispered, the realization cold and sharp in my gut. You weren't just the girl I met at that coffee shop 3 months before the crash. You were placed there. They had my sister, Elias, Sarah sobbed, finally breaking down. Vaccine. They're not just a pharmaceutical company. They're a front for the group that wanted your father's research. My sister owed them money, and they told me if I just got close to you, if I just kept them informed of your father's travel plans, she'd be safe. And when the warning turned into a double homicide? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I couldn't contain. When you sat by my bed and watched me scream in pain from the injuries you helped cause? Was that part of the job too? I fell in love with you, she screamed. That was the mistake. I wasn't supposed to care, but I did. That's why I left. I couldn't look at you anymore and see what I'd done. I thought if I ran away, they'd leave you alone. I thought I was saving you from the rest of their plan. The rest of the plan? Sloane interrupted, her voice hard. You mean the plan to steal the Chimera protocols? The ones Elias's father spent 20 years perfecting? I looked at Sloane. Chimera isn't just an AI, is it? No, Sloane said, stepping toward the server rack. It's a global financial kill switch. Your father knew the system was rigged, Elias. He built a backdoor that could reset the world's debt to zero. Vaccine doesn't want to fix the system. They want to own the backdoor. They've been hunting for the final piece of the code for 7 years. And they think I have it, I said. They don't think you have it, Elias, Sloane said, looking at me with a pained expression. They know you are it. Your father didn't write the final code on a hard drive. He mapped it into your neural pathways during that experimental surgery you had when you were 10, the one for your childhood epilepsy. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My father, the brilliant, distant neuroscientist. He hadn't just saved my life, he had turned me into a biological vault. That's why they need you alive, Sloane continued. And that's why Sarah came back. She wasn't here for money, and she wasn't here for a fake son. She was sent to trigger the emotional stress response required to unlock the dormant data in your brain. Fear, betrayal, the shock of a child. It was all a psychological crowbar. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Not all of it, Elias. Leo. Leo is real. He is your son. I lied about him being in the trunk, yes. I lied about him dying. But he is real. And Miller's people do have him. If I don't give them the access codes by midnight, they'll kill him regardless of what happens here. I stood in the center of the room, the 2 women who had defined my life, one a protector from the grave, the other a traitor who carried my blood, staring at me. The timer, I said, remembering the monitor. The countdown on the screen. It wasn't for the house lights, was it? Sloane's face went pale. She checked her watch. No, it was for the extraction team's thermobaric charge. They don't just want you, Elias. If they can't have the code, they've been ordered to ensure no one else can. As if on cue, the floor beneath us began to hum, a deep, low-frequency vibration that rattled the glass in the windows. The charge is under the foundation, Sloane whispered. They're going to drop the entire hillside. Wait, Sarah screamed, pointing at the monitor. Look! The camera feed from the front gate showed a 3rd SUV pulling up. But it wasn't a black tactical vehicle. It was a white van with a local bakery logo on the side. The door opened and a small boy, no more than 5 years old, was pushed out onto the gravel. He was blindfolded, his hands tied behind his back. A man stepped out after him, holding a detonator in one hand and a megaphone in the other. "Mr. Thorne," the voice boomed, echoing through the rain, "you have 60 seconds to walk out the front door with the master key. If you don't, the boy dies first, then the house. Your choice. The son you never knew, or the secret that could change the world." I looked at the boy, my son, standing alone in the pouring rain. Then I looked at the server rack containing the code that could break the world's chains. "Aria," I whispered, my voice thick with a choice I never asked to make. "Initiate the upload to the public domain." "Elias, no!" Sloan yelled. "If you do that, you'll destroy the global economy. Thousands will die in the chaos." "And if I don't," I said, looking at the small, shivering figure on the screen, "one boy dies for a world that doesn't deserve him." "Upload at 40%, Aria's voice announced. But then, the boy on the screen did something impossible. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He tilted his head, as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. He reached up with his bound hands and pulled the blindfold off. He looked directly into the camera lens. His eyes weren't hazel like Sarah's. They weren't dark like mine. They were glowing with a bright electric violet light. "Father," the boy's voice came over the intercom, overlapping with Aria's. "Don't stop the upload. I'm not the one in danger." The man with the megaphone suddenly screamed, dropping the device as his own hand began to smoke and char, the detonator melting into his palm like wax. "What is he?" Sarah whispered, her voice full of a new kind of horror. "He's not just my son," I realized, the memories of my father's experimental treatments finally clicking into place. "He's the second half of the key." The air in the server room turned static, the hair on my arms standing on end. On the screen, the man with the megaphone was shrieking, his body convulsing as if he'd grabbed a live, high-voltage wire. The detonator in his hand didn't just melt. It fused into a blackened lump of plastic and meat. "Aria, report!" I shouted over the rising hum of the servers. "Upload at 60%, the AI's voice responded, but it was flickering, beginning to merge with the boy's voice. "Neural bridge established. Elias, the data isn't just in your head. It's a distributed network. Half the key was dormant in your synapses. The other half was incubated in Leo's developing brain. Together, you aren't just a vault. You are the administrator." Sarah was staring at the screen, her face drained of color. "What did they do to him? What did your father do to my baby?" "He didn't do it to him, Sarah," I said, a cold realization settling into my bones. "He did it to me. And when Leo was conceived, the code did what any good virus does. It replicated. It adapted." Outside, the extraction team had realized something was horribly wrong. The men who had been flanking the house began to retreat toward the SUVs, but the vehicles were already dead. Their headlights flickered and died. Smoke began pouring from under their hoods as their onboard computers were fried by a localized electromagnetic surge emanating from the boy. Leo stood in the center of the driveway, his small frame silhouetted against the storm. He wasn't moving, but the world around him was bending to his will. The thermobaric charge under my foundation, the one meant to erase us, emitted a high-pitched whine that grew into a deafening scream. "The bomb!" Sloan yelled, grabbing my arm. "The frequency is peaking. If he doesn't stabilize it, the resonance will trigger the primary fuse." I looked at Leo on the screen. He was 5 years old. He was overwhelmed. The violet glow in his eyes was fluctuating, his small chest heaving with the effort of holding back a tide of data he couldn't possibly understand. "I have to go to him," I said. "Elias, if you leave this room, the biometric shielding drops," Sloan warned. "Miller's people are still out there, and the house is a ticking tomb." "He's my son," I said, the words finally carrying the weight they deserved. He's been alone for 5 years. I'm not letting him spend another second in the dark." I didn't wait for her to agree. I sprinted out of the study, through the darkened, glass-strewn hallway, and threw open the front doors. The rain lashed against my face, cold and unforgiving, but I didn't feel it. I only saw the boy. "Leo!" I roared over the thunder. The boy turned his head. The violet light in his eyes was blinding now, tears of pure energy streaking down his cheeks. The man who had been holding him was a charred husk on the gravel. The other mercenaries were fumbling with their weapons, but their guns were jamming, their electronic sights sparking. "It hurts," Leo whispered, his voice projected not through the air but directly into my mind. "Father, there's too much noise. The world is so loud." I reached him in 3 long strides, skidding into the mud at his feet. I didn't care about the code, the money, or the secrets of the global economy. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling his small, shivering body against my chest. "I've got you," I hissed, shielding his head with my hands. "Focus on me, just me. Tune out the rest. Close your eyes, Leo. Let the noise go." The moment we touched, a jolt of electricity surged through me. It wasn't painful, it was a homecoming. 7 years of bitterness, of building walls of glass and steel, vanished. I saw what he saw, a world made of glowing threads of information, a web of debt and power that strangled everyone it touched. And I saw the reset button. "Do it, Leo," I whispered into his hair. "Finish the upload, give it to everyone. If no one owns the secret, no one can kill for it." Leo buried his face in my shoulder, and the air around us seemed to fold. A massive, silent pulse rippled outward from the house. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of data. In an instant, every screen in the city, every server at Vaxxon, every bank ledger in the world flickered. The Chimera protocol didn't just delete wealth, it decrypted the lies. It revealed the hidden accounts, the falsified trials, the names of the men who traded lives for stock options. The hum under the house stopped. The bomb was neutralized. Not by a bomb squad, but by a 5-year-old boy who had simply deleted the command to detonate. The silence that followed was absolute. The mercenaries, realizing their employers were likely being arrested in real time as their secrets hit the public domain, vanished into the woods, leaving their dead behind. I stood up, cradling Leo in my arms. He was unconscious. The violet light faded to a soft, natural brown. He was just a boy again. I turned back to the house. Sarah was standing under the porch light, her suitcase clutched in her hand. She looked at me, her eyes searching for a shred of the man who would forgive her. "Elias," she started, her voice trembling. Is he okay?" "He's alive," I said, my voice cold and hollow. "No thanks to you." "I did what I had to do to survive," she whispered. "You have to understand." "I spent 7 years surviving because of what you did," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "I built this house to keep the world out because you showed me how much it could hurt. But you were right about one thing, Sarah. This isn't the life I wanted." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the emergency flares from the safety kit. I struck one, the red phosphorus hissing to life, casting long, bloody shadows across the marble. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "Cleaning house," I said. I tossed the flare onto the expensive Italian rug. Then another into the study, onto the mahogany desk. The fire caught quickly, fueled by the papers and the high-end finishes. My sanctuary, my fortress of spite, began to burn. "Go, Sarah," I said, not looking back at her. "The money I put in your name years ago, the accounts you thought I didn't know you were skimming, they're still active. Take it and disappear. If I ever see you again, I won't be the man who let you walk away twice." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just turned and ran into the night, a ghost finally exorcised. Sloane appeared at my side, her face illuminated by the growing inferno. "We need to move, Elias. The authorities will be here in minutes, and the reset you just triggered is going to make the world a very dangerous place for a while. Good, I said, adjusting the weight of my son in my arms. I'm tired of being the only one who's afraid. We walked away from the burning mansion, the orange glow reflecting in the raindrops on the windshield of Sloane's hidden getaway car. As we reached the bottom of the hill, I looked back. The Thorn Tower on the horizon was dark. The city's power grid was still recovering from the surge, but my house was a beacon of fire on the ridge. Everything I had built from the ruins was gone. My parents' legacy, my architectural firm, my billions. I looked down at Leo, who was stirring in his sleep, his hand gripping my shirt. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a victim of a dark hour. She had abandoned me when I had nothing, and she had come back when I had everything. But in the end, she gave me the only thing that actually mattered, a reason to stop looking at the past and start building a future. As the car pulled away, leaving the ruins of my old life behind, Leo opened his eyes. They weren't glowing anymore. They were just clear, bright, and full of wonder. "Where are we going, Dad?" he asked, his voice small but steady. I looked out at the dark road ahead, the world wide open and chaotic, and finally, truly free. "Anywhere we want, Leo," I said, and for the first time I meant it. Anywhere we want.